Hey folks, this is Riker. In this guide, we're going to go over three things. First, how the mechanics of cooldown reduction stacking works. Second, the maximum amount of cooldown reduction that you can stack. And lastly, how you can maintain 100% uptime on an effect that renders your entire party invulnerable. Okay, I know you came here to see that last part and not the boring calculations, so click the annotation to skip ahead to that last part. Otherwise, buckle up. We're in for some math. Cooldown reduction reduces the cooldown of a skill by a given percentage. If you have a weapon that grants you 10% cooldown reduction, then a skill with a 30-second cooldown will instead have a 27-second cooldown, 3 seconds or 10% fewer. But what if I have a weapon with a 10% cooldown reduction and a ring with a 5% cooldown reduction? My total cooldown reduction should be 15%, right? Not exactly. You see, cooldown reduction bonuses are not additive. They are multiplicative. In order to do the calculation yourself, simply plug the numbers into this formula. Subtract from 1 the cooldown reduction granted from one source, expressed as a decimal, so 10% becomes 0.1, then multiply that by 1 minus the cooldown reduction of another source, then multiply that by 1 minus the cooldown reduction of your next source, and so on and so on. Then with that number, you subtract all that from the number 1. That will give you your final cooldown reduction expressed as a decimal. So rather than 15%, we see that we come to 14.5%. Not a big deal, right? Just 0.5% difference? Well, when you have cooldown reduction coming from multiple sources, it becomes a big deal. If we have a second ring that also grants 5% cooldown reduction, then the total cooldown isn't 10 plus 5 plus 5 equals 20%, it's actually 18.8%. And that will continue to go down as you add on more sources. So given all that, what's the total cooldown reduction that we can get? We'll be using a handy calculator created by Band of Gamers. You can find the link in the description below, so that you don't have to plug numbers into that complicated formula yourself. From items alone, you can achieve a total of 52.25% cooldown reduction, 10% from your main hand, 12.5% from a diamond in your helm, and 8% each from shoulders, amulet, gloves, 2 rings, and your offhand. Add another 10% if you pump all your Paragon points into cooldown reduction, and we're up to 57%. Add the Captain Crimson set bonus, which is a pretty good set to get, especially for Crusaders, and we're up to 61%. Lastly, since we're using the Crusader as an example, the Fervor passive will grant you an additional 15% cooldown reduction if you are wielding a one-handed weapon. That seems like a steep price to pay, but when the reward is 100% uptime on invulnerability, well, you do the math. With Fervor, we're up to 67% cooldown reduction, which really is where we're going to reasonably cap out. Okay, this is where things get fun. What's the point in stacking cooldown reduction? Apart from being useful to Crusaders in other ways, specifically to maintain Akarat's champion a lot more, by hitting certain cooldown reduction benchmarks, you can achieve 100% uptime on an invulnerability effect across your entire party. This hinges on 2 skills. First, the Laws of Hope skill with the Stop Time rune, which causes all health loss and regeneration to pause for 3 seconds for both you and your party, and works on a 30-second cooldown. Second, the Long Arm of the Law passive, which increases the duration of that effect to 8 seconds. Before patch 2.1, a bug prevented these 2 skills from properly synergizing across parties. But now, on the 2.1 public test realm, and likely moving forward into the 2.1 release itself, things are now working properly, allowing you to maintain 100% uptime on this effect across your party. Without any cooldown reduction, a Crusader can maintain 27% uptime on the invulnerability effect. 8 seconds up, 30 seconds to recharge. That means that a party of 4 Crusaders can remain permanently invulnerable because they would collectively have a little over 100% uptime. But what if you only have 3 Crusaders? Then, in order to maintain permanent invulnerability, each must have 25% cooldown reduction. Solo, each would individually have 36% uptime on the invulnerability. What if you only have 2 Crusaders? In order to maintain permanent invulnerability, each must have 50% cooldown reduction. Solo, each would individually have 50% uptime on the invulnerability. What if you only have 1 Crusader? Well, then you're shit out of luck. Even if you gimp yourself by using the Borns set, that'll only bring you up to 70% total cooldown reduction. The result is about 90% uptime on the invulnerability, which comes out to just under 1 second of downtime. That may still seem great, but the issue with these builds is that you have to sacrifice a lot to get the effect. The best case is having 2 Crusaders in the party constantly cycling the invulnerability, then 2 other characters that will be able to bring the damage, something like 2 Demon Hunters. Permanent invulnerability may seem overpowered, but the fact is you're not going to be contributing a lot of overall damage to the party. If you want to climb those Greater Rift leaderboards, this kind of composition may help, but eventually you're going to reach a point where you just can't complete a Greater Rift in 15 minutes. You won't have the DPS for it. But hey, never dying is still pretty awesome, especially if you can coordinate with those 2 Demon Hunter players to gear solely for DPS and basically be glass cannons. That wraps up this guide. Click here for the best 2.1 Reinhardt build, and click here for more Diablo 3 videos. And until next time, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.